Talk and Power, your motorsport and motoring radio show. Now on 88.5 FM, The Valley Comes Alive. And podcasting across iTunes and talkandpower.com.au.
Talk building the car that today, that was originally owned by New Zealander Doug Jack. He moved to Australia in the early 70s, or
yes.
WA, correct me if I'm
Yes.
Yep. Now this car you own now, that's a genuine dinky dog. That's a Group C car.
Group C
that
car.
one. Yep,
Yep.
that was campaigned in Group C.
Yep.
Talk us through that car then. Like, I mean, back in the day, I don't think there was much value in Group C cars. Like, once they got to sort of, what was it, 87, wasn't it? When they stopped.
They went from 73 to the end of 84 was
84,
the Group C
sorry, of
era.
course, yeah,
and Group
84.
A started in 85.
Yeah. So talk us through that. This car that you now own now.
Okay, well, I met Doug when I was running my first Charger, the old Pooh Brown as I called it, XL Charger at Wanneroo, and Doug rocked up as a scrutineering bay. I can see him to this day. He was a long blonde hair, surfy looking dude, and had this big black felt cowboy hat on, and I'm getting my race car scrutineered, and Doug's there chatting away to me, and we got talking. I've got a 6-pack hot mustard car, and it was parked outside, so everyone parked in the pits in those days. That's when they were on top of the hill. Went out, and here's this hot mustard, big tank E38, and it was fairly new. It was only about a year old when Doug bought it, and it was his everyday drive car up in Kalgoorlie. Kalgoorlie was pretty big on performance cars, V8s and Tiranas, as they were everywhere in the time. Anyhow, Doug had this car, saw me racing, and he was a bit of a petrol head, loved his motorsport coming from New Zealand. There must be something in the water in New Zealand with all these good drivers.
We've said that a few times lately, haven't we?
Yeah, so anyway, Doug rocks up, and he got all enthused, and he was living in Kalgoorlie at the time. Went home, it was at 75, I was running that car, went home, moved to Perth, pulled his car off the road and turned it into a race car and started racing it in 1976.
Yep.
And logbooked as a Group C car so as they could run with the Ian Dippins, and it's run against Moffat and Brock and various cars back in the day. When the Group C guys came over, they all ran together.
Yep.
He was just a club racer having a go, as an also ran, no great claim to fame, just had a go.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so this is the car you have now that you've restored. Talk us through the restoration of this car, because back in the day there was a lot of WA people that worked on the car. You managed to get a lot of the same people to work on the car again.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, Doug was running it in 76 and as a E38, 3-speed.
Yep.
77 upgraded it to an E49 specs with a 4-speed. Ran it for the 2 years, and then that was about it. Work, got married, family, business, all that took over. So the car got parked for a few years, and then he actually bought my old sports sedan in 82 when I bought the different car. He bought my 6-pack and ran that, painted up similar colours in his gold and white theme that he's always had. And he ran that, and the first Charger became surplus to requirements. He threw a V8 into it, experimenting for a little while, but never raced it. And the remnants of that motor is what's in his car today.
Yep.
And the carbies, the downdraft quad carbies, were what came off Diffin's car.
Yeah, okay.
And it all came about because we all used Terry LeMay as our mechanic. So he did my engines, and I probably introduced Doug to Terry. He had the touring car, so he got a lot of the old touring car bits off Diffin's car, torsion bars, brakes, whatever else ended up on Doug's car. But when he'd finished with it, bought my car, didn't need 2 Chargers. So it got sort of broken up. A lot of the parts got sold off it. It was sold to the young fellow who was going to put it on the road. They'd put all the panels off it, sandblasted it, and I believe the panel beater at the time didn't do the right thing. And I don't know the full story, but it ended up being sold as a stripped rolling shell.
Yeah, okay.
And I bought it a few years later, 23 years ago now. I wanted another car for the road. I just wanted something to drive, and I rang up off an ad in the Sunday Times for an E49. Rang the bloke up in Kalamunda and he says, I've just sold it. I'm just doing the paperwork with the bloke now, but give us your name and number and I might know where another one is. So as he's writing my name down, he's calling it out, Craig Marsland, and this bloke who was there says, hey, I want to talk to him. Yeah. And he gets on the phone to me and he says, I've got your old race car. And I said, no, my old race car doesn't exist. He said, no, I've got it. And I knew Doug had chopped my car up years later. It was worn out. I said, I'll come and have a look. So I go around and have a look at this car that he's got, and here's this very sad shell. No rear quarters on it, no hanging panels, just sandblasted with a bit of greeny coloured chromate paint and looking very ordinary.
Wow.
And there's a set of extractors sitting inside it, 6-pack ones, and the collectors had been modified on them. And I saw them and I thought, I did that. They're my old pipes. And then the penny dropped. This could be Doug's car, because Doug used to mix and match between the two cars. And he had a bonnet there, was painted gold and white, and I was starting to put two and two together. I looked further, still had the big back torsion bars in, which they had made for Diffin's car. And torsion bars are normally left and right-handed, but when they had made over east, they didn't realise that, and they were both, let's say, left-handed ones. Yeah. So if you look at the adjuster on Doug's car today, where they are today, one's up and one's down. But they still work the same. So that was in there and had racing brake rotors and things. And so I decided it was Doug's car, and it was clean. It was no rust, because it's been in the shed all this time. Yeah. So we did a deal. They were worth nothing, but all the main components were gone. And so we did a deal with it, and I thought over time I can put it all back together and have a nice 6-pack road car. So then we cut out all the linkages and stuff underneath for Watts linkages. The inner rear guards were changed because they'd all been rolled and belted out to fit big wheels under them. So I put everything back to standard, had it all panel beated, 2 brand new rear quarters put on, which the panel beater at the time did a lousy job on, but they're on and they're fine now, but that took a lot of remedial work. Anyway, I put it all back to standard, and I just finished doing that and had it on the rotisserie, and then the Heritage touring cars started over east around about 2000, and that was for Group C cars. Yeah. And Doug knew I had the car, because we're mates, had been mates right through, and he said, I've still got the logbook for it. Sure enough, it was a Group C logbook, and I knew it was a Group C, because when I bought it, I got the numbers off the car, because the compliance plate was still on it. I went to Cam's to make sure it was Doug's car. A young fellow dragged out, photocopied all the applications over time. It was all there, Group C. And wow. I thought, there's the proof. So anyway, I thought, a little bit of WA history here, and there's no Group C surviving historic cars left. We know where 2 are. I know where the Grace Brothers Pete Gagan car is. It's in pieces, but it's with a collector. And the other one is the Brian Ovenden Charger hot mustard car, which is restored. It's all sign written up. It's road registered in Victoria. And a fellow who's got that it was also ended up a Group C car as well. But they're the only 2 that we know. There's a few more around, but nothing special. Yeah.
Talk about a sliding doors moment. That's a prime example. Had you not made that phone call at that moment, probably would never. The car would have been chopped up, and it was virtually wrecked. No, it had been parted out.
So what was the intention of the guy the guy who was going to buy it? Like, what was his intention?
Oh, he was a wheeler dealer. He was buying 6-packs and pulling them apart and selling them off because you got more money for them. They're worth nothing. Yeah. I had a big tank E38 in 1985, and it was again another old race car, but we never quite found its racing history. But it was a big tank E38, and I bought it in pieces. And it was another link. It had a drag racer had it, Ross Weinoff, raced back in the day, and it was his car. And Ross got sick of it, and he rang me up one day. He says, "Want to buy a Charger, do you?" And didn't want a lot of money for it. It was in pieces. He'd painted it, but just lost interest. So I think I paid him $1,000 for it and took it home. And over time, built the engine up, and it had all the correct gear in it. And I ran round it as my everyday car for a year or two, and then. I can't remember. I can't remember why. Anyway, I sold it. sat in Laurie Matthews' car yard for 6 months in about 85 or 86 or thereabouts, and we could not get $7,000 for it.
Wow.
And it was a nice car. It was, the Hemi Orange, and all very original, and again, no rust. It was been in a shed. It hadn't been on the racetrack and been on the road only a short time. And, so anyway, once we knew its identity and the historic thing started, and I thought, just...
Well, that's leads me to where we were like maybe half hour ago. But the Motorsport Australia cams back in the day when you did it, but Motorsport Australia Certificate of Description, I think it's called, coupled with a historic logbook. Tell us how important that is, like, because it probably means nothing to the average punter, but how important.
Some categories of racing, the previous categories, which are known as Group NB, NC, was up to 1972. Now, there are some genuine original cars, but you can build a replica and whatever. And again, people do try and pass off replicas as the car that Peter Brock had. Everyone's got a Peter Brock XU1 around the place, or Peter had it. And then, so, no, they realised they had to get a bit tougher on their identity stuff. So I don't know when it was introduced, but they brought out a certificate of description for historic cars, more so the open wheelers and things, which are very, very valuable, some of them. So it was a way of policing it, and you had to prove their identities. So when the Group C cars started, they wanted to bring back the Bathurst cars, the Tiranas and the two-door Falcons, and just that muscle car era. And they had to be the real deal. So that's the rules for the heritage cars. If you want to race in heritage touring cars, they have to be in the real deal. You have to prove they're the real deal. Numbers off the cars, the sequence of owners, you've got to have photographs, magazine reports, race results. It all has to be documented and proven. That's what it is. So it took me about 2-3 years to go through the process, because Doug's car was just a club racer, not a lot of publicity at the time. My younger brother was an amateur photographer, and he'd been up there taking snapshots of the cars. We had virtually nothing. Doug had 2 or 3 historic shots of the car. Brother Luke's up there, took photos in the S's the day Moffat and Brock were here, and it must have been 77. And bugger me, and he's just got shots as the cars are coming towards him. There's Moffat, there's Brock, here's Doug Jack, and then I'm driving Greg Mygrove's two-door Falcon, and there's one of the shots, you can just see there's Graham Hooley in his XU1, Wayne Negus is in the L34, the Holden dealer team car, Doug Jack's behind him, and you can just see the front corner of the Falcon coming up behind. And I thought there were all of us, Doug, me, the cars, we're all on the track at the time.
How awesome was that, like looking back through history and finding that sort of... But
because I was there, I've been involved all the way through, and I recognised the cars, I knew them as part of that was my scene.
A lot of history.
Has it been on the track with Moffat, Brock?
Oh no.
No?
All those.
It's a bit of a...
Mixing it amongst those guys.
And they were our idols of the day. And we got to know a lot of them over the time, and I've spoken to both Moffat and Brock in years gone by. And over east, this last trip I had over there, I met a lot of famous drivers then. And Kevin Bartlett, I've renewed acquaintances with him years later. And you know what? They're the same as you, me, and everyone else. We're just a bunch of petrol heads and love our cars.
No, that's right.
Look, there's a few Hollywooders out there, the wallet racers, and they're all better than what we are. But go for it, mate.
Good luck to them, we say. Craig, I want to talk about. We'll get back to Sports Sedan. What do you think was the popularity of Sports Sedan was huge back in those days? How do we invigorate that category again and get it back to where it needs to be, in my view? Because I really think it's an untapped source of motorsport. I don't know if we fragmented sedan racing in Australia too much.
Oh, hugely. It was back in the days when I was on the committee at Wanneroo, we were always very conscious of having too many different groups, and that's what's happened. Street cars evolved into the street cars of today, and nothing like they should or could be there. And there's a few of them, and there's all these different little categories, and they got half a dozen cars in each, and that's a disaster, my personal opinion.
Yep.
That's not what it should be. But so here in WA, there's no, apart from Basil Ricciardello's car, which is still a state-of-the-art car and won multiple championships with Brian Smith and his son Tony, and that's still a very competitive car. But on the east coast, the sports sedans are up and running again. They've been building over the last few years, and they're going to get a little bit of TV publicity this year at some of the lesser events. I think they're running at the Indy 500 up in the Gold Coast. And a few others around. But when I was over in Sydney last June, July, I went to one of their meetings, and they are state-of-the-art cars. They're the latest versions of the McCormicks and the Diffins and all those things. They're space-framed. The supercars of today really are sports sedans. End of story.
Yeah, that's true.
They saw what the recipe was for sports sedans, and it got hijacked along the way. And supercars are sports sedans, but they have their limitations. The real sports sedans with all their independent rear ends and the homemade build it in your back shed, even though they're very highly strung cars today, there's a big field now of state-of-the-art sports sedans that are incredibly fast. And they're quicker than the supercars. And you got to go and see them. They're the ball terrors of today.
I love them, I mean, but they've been faster than supercars for a long time. I mean,
the rules have opened up now. They're virtually fiberglass bodies flopped over, whatever. They still have to look like the real deal. But over in Sydney, what's his name? Heimgartner, who drives
Andre.
Andre. He was driving this Aston Martin car. It's just a shell, and it's even bigger than the standard Aston Martin, but you would never know. And I was just looking at it. Oh, it's just so technical. And there was any number of them there, the same. And so, yes, and hopefully it will... Those big dollar cars, we always only ever see a handful in WA. There's not the resources, there's not the population here. That's why the Ian Diffins of the world and various other ones over time have always gone east to race. We'll see them on occasion, same with Basil Ricciardello. Don't see him very much because there's not enough here to make a big field of those sorts of cars. Great to see, but in a way they cruel it for the club racer, where we had 40 cars maximum fields back in my day. Where most of the cars were sort of like mine. No, we'd all just a bunch of guys putting them together, chuck a V8 in an Escort or whatever, build it yourself, have fun. But the wallet races come along, and which is what Ian Diffin did. He built the biggest and the best at the time. Everyone else tries to keep up, and then all of a sudden, why bother? We're never going to beat them. And that was me. I had to try and think of other ways of building a competitive car. The Jaguar I built to go and compete in the national championships. Everyone was running a Chev V8 350 Chev. That was the quickest and cheapest way to get horsepower at the time. But then it was $25,000 for a 500 plus horsepower Chev. And then plus. I didn't have that sort of money. So I did my homework. Phil Myers built a Speedway XJS Jaguar with a V12, and I'd help with the building of it. And I'd always fascinated with what McCormick did with his, and that car never ever showed its full potential because John had a bad road accident, and that was the end of his driving career. Mark has since developed it and won a lot with it. But, so I copied what was there, and then I changed things, and I sort of studied the mechanicals and space frames, and I'm a backyarder, but I've done a bit of reading and whatever. And I built what I thought was a state-of-the-art sports sedan, and it was, but it never got to prove itself. And a real beaut compliment was paid to me last year when I was over at Mark's workshop up in Queensland, because he's got the McCormick Jaguar been restored. He built another one in later years, which he's restored, which is an even bigger beast again. And he said, come out and look at this. And I knew he had my old car, or what was left of it. And up on the shelf, there's my chassis sitting up there.
Oh, wow.
And he said when John McCormick saw it, was their great mates, John had a real good look at it, and John's a racing car engineer. And he looked at Mark, he said that would make a really good Can-Am type sports car chassis. And for John McCormick to say about my design, and I was chuffed.
That's...
And Mark actually has a Matic SR3 body, an old Can-Am type body from back in the 70s. And it was a long anyway, he's got this car. It was never been built. It was a spare body. He says it probably will never happen, but he said that body would fit perfectly onto that chassis. They'd rear engine it, but it's all there. No, the space frame is how it should be.
Someone should try and make that happen.
Yeah.
Wallet.
Yeah.
Yes. But
Yeah.
the thing is, it's not modern technology now. It was I built it 35, 40 years ago,
Yeah.
87.
Yeah.
So it would have been good then. By today, look, you can always, but no, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
But you could go and build a replica old car with it,
Mm.
but it's not going to fit. You won't be able to race it in a lot of places because it's
Yeah.
not a genuine one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So who knows? Someone might buy it and turn it into a sports sedan. You could still turn it into a sports sedan.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I know you travelled a little bit, not a lot, but you did travel a little bit in sports sedan. Talk us through that, like travelling in Australia, what it was like back then, like because it's not like now where you roll up in a B double and you know. Talk us like through the 80s.
My tow car, like we went to Adelaide in 1980. Was my first trip away. Dick Ward, who was doing a bit of racing on the East Coast with his little Fiat at the time, and we got to know a lot of the racers and that, and we thought it's time we got all the club races together and do something for us. Forget about the top echelon. So we came up with this idea between Dick and whoever that we should go to Adelaide and go and race against the boys there, and then they can come over here and we'll call it Twin State Challenge. And somewhere along the Victorians came along as well. So I remember Gary Rogers.
Oh, Gary Rogers.
Gary Rogers. He was running a Tirana hatchback at the time.
Yes.
He was there, and a few other hot shots from Victoria came up to spoil the party, but it was all good. Anyway, 1980, we all trundled off to Adelaide, and we had a big fundraising thing for 12 months beforehand because we had to take about 10 cars over.
Yeah.
So we had gentlemen's nights. Wasn't too much gentlemanly about it, but we've all been there, done that. A couple of beers and a couple of what was
then
then
$1.
anything to make $1. A couple of illegal chocolate wheels and card games, but it was all in good fun. And I can remember back in the day, the police, it was always in an industrial area, and the police used to patrol the areas at night, Osborne Park, and because there are any number of racing people in there, and quite often their coffee spots for their supper time was usually at someone's workshop. Performance Modifications, Brian Sadler, we'd be there working on the sprint cars at night, and the coppers would call in, "How you going, boys?" We had a workshop in Guthrie Street in an old pickle factory, and there were 4 of us in there with me and my Chargers. The Ian Diffen's Tirana ended up with Mike Bignell, so Steve Coyle ended up spannering that in there, and we had a couple of open wheelers, and from the outside it was a derelict building. No one knew what was in there.
Yeah.
And of course these cars had to be tested, didn't they? So we're in Guthrie Street, and at midnight on whatever night of the week it was, we'd fire. It'd be nothing to have a sprint car go around the block or one of these full-blown sports sedans, open exhausts. No one lived there, bar one person up the road. The minute he'd heard the cars fire up, he'd ring the cops. He was just a pain in the bum. Anyway, so the cops would come down and they'd put their siren on and blow their do their flashing lights past his house, and they'd call in and they'd leave the cars out the front of the workshop. And they'd come in, supper time, boys. They got their coffees and burgers, and apparently this guy used to complain about anything and everything, and they hated him.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was happy because the cops were there, and we'd already done our test run by the time we got there. So things we did, but but getting back to how we raised money to hire a car transporter. So we had 3, 4, 7, I think it was 8 cars.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, it was a proper double-decker thing. It was TNT Transport in the day. I can still see it today. Down at Gogie's building in O'Malley Street at the time, we loaded them all up. And on that trailer we had Bob Biltoff's car. That was a XU1 Tirana. Mike Barnes used to drive it. There was Gordon Mitchell's car, the Ciccelli Alfa Romeo. There was a little Cortina that Jeff Minnie drove, and that was a famous little GT Cortina that had gone through the hands. There was my car in the middle. Peter Henderson had a little XU1. Joe Ricardo had his little GTA Alpha there. We were all the local boys.
How awesome
and we
is
loaded
that?
this truck up, and then we...
Look at that truck.
I know.
I've got photos of it there somewhere. Yeah, all loaded up, and some good names on there, and then we had to get all the crews over. So we just filled our cars with spare wheels, toolboxes, everything went into the race car, and whatever didn't fit in there didn't go. So anyway, loaded them all up, and then we had to get everyone over there. So we included in the fundraising, we had to get a 40-seat Parlour Cars tourist coach. And Parlour Cars came on board as sort of like sponsors and did a good deal. So we filled it up with drivers first, pit crews, and then whatever was left we were able to sell off to supporters. So the bus was packed, and we had 40, the racers, the pit crews, a few husbands and wives, not too many girls, but there were a few there. And the girls became boys for that week, because you can imagine
40 of us on the same bus.
And it was great. Now we all non-stop there on the bus. It was all done. Anyway, we got there. We stayed. I think some stayed in motels and wherever budget accommodation. One of my pit crew was from Adelaide, and he had a cousin over there. He was just a young bloke. Had this old house in St Peters, and I think we had 4 or 5 of us. We took our sleeping bags and all just slept on his lounge room floor.
Yep.
And bummed a car off. I was sponsored by a Chrysler dealer over there. Bummed a car off him as for transport for the week, and away we went. So that was the first. That was 1980.
Yep.
And that was on the old Adelaide International Raceway circuit. So we did that, and then 2 months later, all the South Australian boys came over to WA, and I won the series.
Oh wow! How awesome is that?
It was all done on a
Worth
point
the trip.
scoring thing for the different capacities and whatever else, and out of all the V8s and everything else, and all those who'd laughed at me with race the bloody Chrysler. And to this day, that trophy is my favourite.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
Yeah, that was pretty special. It was just through being reliable and consistent, and so I wasn't the fastest, but you had to be there at the end.
Yeah.
So
that's quite incredible, and that's what grassroots motorsport is all about. I like it. You hear stories like you don't hear.
You're not going to hear stories like that these days.
No.
Like I got working in the back of sheds or.
Look, and even better, the next year we all went back again, and it was the sand gropers versus the crow eaters.
Yep.
And there was all sorts of cartoons being done. There were bottles of wine that Stoney the cartoonist did. Their fundraisers from the other end, because you can go to any winery and get all these wines, put your own label on it. So they had this Stoney did this cartoon of the caricatures of the West Australian cars and the Aussie South Australian cars on the front. I've got some at home, I'll show it to you one day.
Yeah.
And it shows them on the racetrack, there's smoke and clouds and the huff and puff and everything there. And the name of it was Rene Pogel Port. And it was a famous brand of wine, but from one of the things. But have a think of it, Rene Pogel, spell it backwards.
Rene
L-E-G. Lego.
Oh God.
That's the brand, Rene Pogel Port. That's Stoney. You're not allowed to do that sort of stuff these days.
No, there was on a Rego, wasn't it? Just recently, leg opener.
Oh, no, a
Lamborghini that
Yeah.
got knocked back. Yes.
So anyway, that was just one of the little funny things, and I've still got those little things. The following year, we couldn't afford to do the transporters and all the rest of it, so we still had the fundraisers, but we decided we'd tow our own cars over.
Yeah.
And I had a CL 318 manual Charger, which was the last of the Royal V8s, and that was my everyday road car, and that was my tow car. So the next year we towed the 6-pack over on a big heavy tandem trailer, and big toolboxes, a spare diff with minus the hubs, or no, it was complete axle to axle that could just fit into the boot of the tow car. You take the wheels off and you sort of wriggle it that way and that way, and where the drain tubes are on a Charger, we tied it to them so it couldn't flop around. If you'd had a head on, it would have just come straight through the car, but that didn't matter. We had toolboxes in there. The race car was full of the spare wheels, your jerry cans, and then we had 4 people on board. You had to have your 3 mates because they all had to dob in for the fuel because they were having a holiday, but they had to help
so the
me.
more people you had, the more money you had.
Yeah, so con all your mates to come along and share the fuel bill, and you'd leave on nothing. No, if anything major broke down in the Nullarbor, we were buggered. It was it was virtually what we had in our pockets.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we would get there, and the only time I bought booze in those days was on race day, and that was payment for the pit crew. That was their pay, a carton of beer. Anyway, we'd get to Adelaide, and of course the partying went on with the thems and us's, and it was a big event. We did the same with the boys here. There was always a big affair.
Big.
And again, met some famous people at some of those events.
I can imagine.
And, anyway, we do all that, and then we get home in this towing the Ian Diffin. I blew the Ian Diffin car up in '82 over there. We had a cam follower broke, and we caught it in time, parked it. So I think a bottle or two of Jim Beam disappeared that weekend, and we drowned our sorrows. And I never raced it again after that. I was broke.
Yeah.
But getting home, we were so broke that the mates had with us then. We got to about Kalgoorlie, and I'd run out of money, and we're all going through who's got a credit card, and we were a bit on this one's card and a bit on that one's credit card, and we got home.
Yeah, but they're the great stories that go with what you do.
And my mate Craig Marsland went, and we're all the same. Greg towed his cars over. He ended up owning the Bob Jane Tirana in the end here, and still runs successful sprint cars today. And we all shared a house together. Greg Marsland, Doug Jack, myself, we all shared a house in Nollamara, all had race cars. Yeah. Neighbours must have hated us. We'd start cars up 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, open exhaust, no whoompa, whoompa. No one cared. And but yeah, it was just really, really good fun.
Was it just like? Did you ever have the opportunity to even just drive another car, like in over east or Bathurst or anything like that?
Not in those days. No. Drove to Bathurst, spectated a few times. Yep. Always had the dream. If I knew then what I know now, I should have just packed my bags and gone east.
Yeah.
I think I could have made it.
Yep.
I knew how to get sponsorship, but I didn't have a trade or anything to fall back on. I was a bank Johnny. Yeah. And then I was in real estate, pardon me, after that. But I don't know, the entrepreneur in me wasn't there at the time.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was a long way from home, no support, and didn't have any money.
Yeah.
I spent every cent I had on race cars. Yeah. But I was an okay driver with what I had and what I'd made. And my mate Craig Marsland termed it many years ago, and you've heard me use it before, we're busted ass backyard races. Yeah. And nothing's changed.
Yeah.
No, for all of us. We had a go, and we're still doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
it, yeah. Just before we finish up, one of the interesting things that I learnt about you as well, you participated twice, not once but twice, in the Fink Desert Race.
Yep.
Talk us through that, because that's kind of left of field. I know you did say you're into your motorbikes, and you started off with motorbikes.
Up in Geraldton, and I started in motocross up there, and the bikes were pretty unreliable, but again, having a go.
Yeah.
And I raced against some fantastic, famous motocross riders of the day. Graham Smythe, who went on to be multiple champion, Richie Kings, who was a multi-champion. We'd have open events up there, and all the guns from Perth would come up. Rick Gill, who's still around today pedals cars these days, but he was an A-grade rider in his day and went road racing and a good all-rounder. And there was any number of them like that. And I was 16 in my first open event and on the track with all these guns, and then did the open scrambles round back in the day, did the Harley scramble at York on Mount Brown, and went to Collie and Northam and all the tracks of the day. Yep. And then, when I came to Perth, that all came to an end. Someone introduced me to road racing, and anyway, but then when I was about 40, my oldest boy was 12, 13 and interested in motorbikes. So got him a little 125 motocrosser, and then went to the track with the kids. And up at Northam, they had this greybeards racing for over 35-year-olds. It was usually dads riding their kids' bikes and whatever. And I thought, I can do that. And I hadn't raced for a while because family growing up. Still loved my bike, so we got Anthony this little bike, and he played around on it. And I went out and jumped on it up at Northam. Hadn't ridden for 23 years at that stage. I did one lap of the Northam track and came in just about in tears. The arm pump on the arms. Totally, I was always sort of fit, but motocross is in a league of its own when it comes to being fit. Yeah. And anyway, but the bug was back, and it was something I could do with my kids, and all three boys are petrol heads. I don't know where they get it from. Anyway, that got it rolling, and I then continued on with getting some more suitable bikes for racing in the veterans, and then another mate introduced me to cross-country events where you do over 4 hours on a farm, 25-kilometre laps on a farm just through the bush in a laid-out track. And it took a while to become bike fit, but I quite enjoyed it, and that was really good. And Paul was a South African, and he'd done some of their big off-road events over there. And Paul was a lot younger than me. He said, "We're going to go and do the Fink." I said, "Paul," by then I'm all in my late 40s. I said, "Paul, I'm 40, let me think, would have been 48, I think, thereabouts. And he's about 35. And I used a few expletives that aren't in the dictionary and said, "No, I'm effing well 48 and you're whatever." And he said, No, you're good. You do it. We do the events here." So anyway, we did it. The first year I had a TC 610 Husqvarna, a big 600cc single-cylinder purpose-built bike, which was pretty flash in those days, except I couldn't get it round my head that you had to be 19 years old with no brains to ride it, not a geriatric. But awesome motorbike, very fast. And I'd had a big accident only about a month before and had a shirt full of broken ribs, but I was going.
Yep.
Anyway, we got there, drove across through the Central Highway, camped out along the way. It's June, winter time, cold, ice on the swags at night. Fantastic. Anyway, we drove over there, did the event, got down. You get 4 hours to do it in all your time out. And I just made it, fell off on the way down, gave the old ribs a tune up while I was at it. And we got down there, and you camp overnight just out in the scrub. You put all your swags and stuff onto a truck, and it takes it all down there. And got down, as did Paul, and turned around and came back. No, I finished. It was just to finish. It was a feat. And there were 300 motorbikes, a big bunch of sidecar outfits, some quads, and about 100 buggies in those days. And I did it, best event ever. And I just said, I did it, I finished. And one of the top guys used to say, anyone who finishes, you get a little railway spike, because it follows the old Gann railway line.
Okay, yep.
And they've used all the old railway spikes, and they've cleaned them up and put a little thing on there, Survivor, Fink, and the year. So that's the award. That's awesome, mate. And so I've got that. And the bike I was on was totally unsuitable, extremely fast. In a straight line, we'd gear them up to do over 100 miles an hour in the dirt. And the track is everything from first gear, rocky, snotty crap, to loose, like river sand, and it's all whooped out for about the last 60 k's when you're just about buggered, and then you hit these whoops. Yeah. And that's what threw me off. Anyway, so that was great, and I thought, I've got to do this again. But I got a more suitable bike, got a little XR400 Honda, got properly fit along with my mate Paul, and went back 2 years later, and I was running in and out of third in the veterans, which was the over 45s category. I was never going to do better than that because the other guys were just in a different league. So anyway,
but even just to compete at that level, that's pretty cool.
All the way down, I was running in and out of third place. Yep. And thought, good, just pacing myself. I had a huge storm came through overnight. Never happens. First wet one in 24 years or something. Flooded the joint. All the helicopters were parked in the riverbed at the Fink in the middle of the night. They had to fire them up and get out of the riverbed because it flooded in no time. Yeah. And the track next day was a quagmire. It was 2/3 of it was underwater. And 100 buggies went through first in the morning, and at midday they start the motorbikes. 300 motorbikes, all us old farts are down the back. And you imagine it was just a brown porridge. Yeah. And I timed out, but I thought, well, I've got no pit crew. You've got to keep going. How am I going to get back? Yeah. So you just keep riding even though you've timed out. And then all the fuel stops were disappearing because everyone's packing up and going, and it was so wet. And of course, you can't ride at the pace you need to. So anyway, I followed the road back where all the spectators were, and I got to about where the fuel stop was, and they'd gone. And some of the people, what are you looking for? I need some fuel. Oh, yeah, here you go. So they tipped some fuel in, and I got back just before dark. But I finished but timed out.
It's incredible.
You can't do anything. You can't go, stuff it. Hey, can you come pick me up?
But that was in my 50th year.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And then I did a bit more that following year, and that was it.
Yeah, yeah. That is quite incredible. I mean, you don't normally get people that sort of tie in quite heavily with both motorbikes and cars. I know there's people that have done it before, but the thing, when I saw that, I was like, hang on a sec, the Fig Desert Rally. I said, that's pretty
If you're into
notable.
motorbikes and off-road, you got to do it.
Yeah.
But be fit, get fit.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I could never do it. I could certainly never do it. Craig, I think, I don't know if you had any more.
I feel I've stolen the floor.
No, it's all about you, mate.
That's the whole idea. That's what we prefer. It's great to look. We really appreciate you coming on, Craig. It's been an honour to have you here. I am a big fan of what you've done. I'm a big fan of Group C cars. I'm a big fan of sports sedan. I wouldn't call myself a big fan of the Chrysler, the Mark, but my father, when I was born, that's what he had. He had a Valiant, VC Valiant. That's why I said I know that car really well. I'd love to find that car one day, but anyway, that's another story. But that's yours.
Tim will find it for you.
Yeah, I'll give it to him. I can give you the rego. But that's the whole reason why we wanted to have you on, because that's of great interest to me, and I know it's a great interest to many of our listeners as well, especially stories like what you just told us, especially about the car carrier and the bus. That is stuff that's you just don't hear of today.
Well, just to finish off, my last excursion I did with an old Toyota Coaster bus. So it was a $2,000 bomb that I bought. Had to change the engine, turn it into a camper bus. Had to have a new trailer made and towed it across on my own, and did 5 events over east with the historics, including Bathurst in the wet. Slopped around. It was awful. The car didn't behave itself, but the experience, it was something else. And the people, and just, it was fantastic.
Yeah. These are the sort of stories that, and this is the whole idea of the podcast, is we want to hear these stories. Yeah. We want to hear all about the things that you've done, and I think they're amazing. And restoring these cars and bringing the Ian Diffin car, that's of big interest to a lot of our listeners. The car you own now, Doug Jack's old car, that's of great interest to our listeners. And I think what you've done in your lifetime is amazing. And it's really great to have you on.
See, I always think of, I've never quite got there now. And
no, I disagree.
If I'd done like
if I did a fraction of
what
you've done, I'd be happy.
I would have been happy.
Yeah.
But
just one race
I just feel like I should have done more, you know, and I think
you should have gone east. That's what I think you should have done.
Yeah, but look, I've done okay, and I've done other things in my life too.
For sure.
And now I've got 3 great kids.
But you still show the car as well. Like that's one important thing. Like you were just that, and that's how I actually got to meet you in person. That's one race where you had both cars were there side by side, and you were very welcoming to myself and to anyone that come and had a look at the car to get up close and personal. So
and I've done that all my life. When through doing car displays and passionate about the sport, whether it's cars, motorbikes, whoever else. I've always been on committees, helped build half Wanneroo back in the day. It's just what you do. You're part of a club and you talk to people. And when we go on the East Coast, I did a few car shows over there. We did the the Central Coast Wake Run. They invited me to that, and I had to drive 2 hours north of where I was on the rotten freeways over there and all the rest, and you just talk to people. And everywhere you go, Bathurst, we'd get the car out of the tent to start it up. It was raining, it was horrible. You're under the bonnet, vroom, 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 warming it up, and you look up, there's 6 deep all around the car. The young ones have never seen anything like it.
I know, but that's they haven't, and that's what it's important what you're doing, because it's educating them. And
one of the things that if people want to see it, it then ended up in the National Motor Racing Museum at Bathurst for 6 months. They said, please don't take it home. And they put it in the prime spot there, #1 spot. It's the only Group C charger in Australia, or documented one.
I didn't know. So it did time in...
After Bathurst, the coordinator there came over.
That was just recently.
So I was at Bathurst for Supercars last year. It was wet, it was horrible. But he came over and he knew the car, had seen the write-ups in the magazines and everything. He said, what are you doing with it now? I said, we're going home, we're broke, it's all over, the journey's finished. He said, please don't take it, no, we want it in the museum. And he said, there's no nice racing chargers around, or not many that they can have. I said, I can't afford it, I can't afford to come back. No, we'll look after you. So I left it with him. I spent all race day, supercar race day, in the tent, detailing it, because it'd been on the track in the wet. It was disgusting. So that was my Bathurst race day, detailing it up.
How awesome is that?
And then, because you have to drive on the road out of the track, well, the track is a public road, and you've got to drive down and around a roundabout outside the track and then up to where the museum is. Car's unregistered. Should have got a permit. And I'm not going to load it up on the trailer and just go, So I just went round to the museum, made sure they're ready for it, fired it up on the Monday morning and drove it round the track. Drove it round on the road and into the museum. And Brad, they videoed it coming up the street and driving into the museum.
This is why when I went to see the car, I'd seen it because I'd seen footage of it.
Yeah, okay,
Numerous posts on Facebook. And that's why when I went to Wanneroo, I was just drawn to it, And then he goes, you can. I said, look, I've seen videos, I just haven't seen it in person yet. It's the only thing.
And it's going to go into the museum here very soon. They're just waiting as they turn the displays over.
Oh, so Whiteman Park?
At Whiteman Park. So if people want to see it, it will be at Whiteman Park.
I would look forward to seeing it there, Whiteman Park. Shout out to all the team at Whiteman Park. They do a magnificent job there. That's
so it'll go out there for a period of time. I don't know how long, but it's up to them. But at Bathurst, they wanted it forever, but it's... And I think I told you, they put it in the prime spot. When you walk in the front door, it was in the number one spot. They were just wrapped in it. So
that's awesome.
That's not bad for a little old backyard racer from WA.
You will take that. That's awesome.
Anyway, I could dribble on forever.
Craig, we really appreciate you coming in for this podcast. It's been awesome having you here. I've really enjoyed this. I think you have as well. Kim, thank you very much.
Good, no problems.
I really appreciate. I know you
listened.
Yeah, but I mean, I know you helped us out with the research as well, because I wouldn't have been able to get through all of that.
Definitely.
Kim narrowed it down, sent us articles that were relevant, and that's where we did our research. So thank you for that, Kim, as well. Problems. I know you're heavily involved with the club as well. I know you're the official photographer, or one of the official photographers. They do a magnificent job, so thank you to Kim as well.
No problems, thank you.
But now if people are out and about, if they see us on the cars on display, it'll be at the Chrysler show later this year. Don't be scared to come up and have a chat.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And I do believe the Ian Diffin Charger is due to be fired up for the first time in, I don't know, maybe 10 years or more at the Chrysler show in October.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, well, we're going to have to... When's that? It's
22nd of October at Claremont Showgrounds.
It wouldn't conflict with all 4 days, as long as it's... okay, cool.
Maybe we'll get you down for that one as well.
Yeah, no, I'd like to be there for that. I would definitely like to be there. I have seen the Ian Diffin car a few times now at shows, but it would be nice to see that again and hear it fired up as well.
It's been cleaned up drastically
in the
last 5 or 6 months, so
It's work in progress. He'll eventually have it looking how it should look. I think Jake Repovic's going to get the engine running. And I've been down a few times and just pointed out a few little bits and pieces on it. It's a shame I live so far away from him, but otherwise I'd happily go down there and do a bit of work. But I'm in the middle of renovating an old house at the moment, so I don't have enough things to do.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, that's fair enough.
And fixing my bus, which a big Roo had an argument with on the last trip across.
I saw that photo, actually. I saw that,
That's what I've been doing today. I've been at the wreckers today, cutting the front off a bloody Toyota bus to fix it.
It looked pretty bad, that hit.
I had $19,000 worth of damage. So insurance is not going to fix it. So write it off, so I've kept it. And I have to fix it. They're all fixable, but... no one's going to pay $19,000 to. So
fair enough.
I'm it.
No. All right, Craig. Well, look, thank you very much. Kim, thank you very much. Johnny, thank you very much as well for hosting us tonight. It's great to be here, and thanks for everyone for watching as well. If you're listening to us, make sure you go back and watch it as well. It's definitely worth watching. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot.